talked a little, you mentioned people getting thrown in the water as they're kids and learning that kind of place. And we talked about it earlier about the trauma it does for some, and yet other people come up out of it and how that plays. But we were talking a little about swimming religions the other day, things that, you just can't cross that. You can't change that. You can't make that happen. And in truth, because it is a bigger sport, that's a harder thing to find as we get rolling, as we get going down the road.
Absolutely.
And you probably have a lot of trouble finding that with your masters, don't you? Just because of the variety of people who are tucked away in there?
Yeah, I think it's such a large umbrella, that there's a lot of different philosophies, and a lot of it is era, I mean, with swimming, the 90s, the ground and pound, yards. I mean, but if you think about that era of 70s, 80s, 90s as well, and the aesthetic involved, you go back to even lifting with the Tom Platzes and the Arnolds and the, just volume and do, and that's what's going to make you better. And everything is a lot more technically put together now. There isn't as most of you probably know, 2023 is not the gritty, rough and tough 70s, out on the streets as it it once was. Right now is a little interesting of how everything is very technically put together. People have trainers from a really young age. People are very well put together. So the philosophies, the religions have changed. You've got to have a trainer. You've got to have a dietitian. You've got to have this and that. I mean, even for me, and I was, in high school 10 years ago, it was different. I think I was a little bit more raw in my day-to-day schedule, and even more so going back to the old swim religions of how you're supposed to learn, and Dad's taking us to the lake house and pushing us off the dock and saying get back. It's a little different, and it offers a better perspective on trauma. I think that we're a little bit more receptive to that as well nowadays.
We certainly are.
Yeah. Absolutely. So how to come about swimming and what is swimming to all of us is changed, and it's shifted. In some ways it may be different, but once again, going back to the beginning of your question, I think the umbrella that is masters is interesting, just because I have people in their 60s and their 40s and their 20s, and how they learned to swim was vastly different. And some feel that they're better for it, and others feel like, well, I would have killed to kind of ease my way in. 20 years ago when I was first learning how to swim. I think in some ways it created a little bit of an unhealthy relationship for some of them too.
With the water.
With water.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
Yeah. The you said something. It was throwing in the water. You were talking about technical pieces of that. So in the old days, right, and I'm saying 50s kind of part of the world, what it meant to swim, I think that whole sense has changed. What it meant to swim back there was that you were comfortable in the water and you could get from place to place, and it wasn't about so much about technical stuff, and for some it was about competition, certainly, because we were racing and Weissmuller was out there. But for a lot of people it was just about being able to play in the water and do that kind of stuff. As we've moved, which didn't necessarily mean strokes at all, right? Didn't necessarily mean you learned any strokes, you were just able to move around. Through the 70s, 80s, 90s, it became much more a stroke-based thing and was much less about comfort. And so the thing we're doing and the thing other people like us are doing is going back to find that comfort, that space, so that it's not the technical drive. You don't look at every little movement of your hand. You don't look at every little thing. It's not about stroke. It's about being comfortable, about moving through the water, and about having that relationship with the water that you love. It's like, okay, I love the water.
Right.
If I look at me, if y'all look at my breaststroke kick, none of the coaches think it's a particularly good kick, but I get across the lake, right? I mean, I get across the water, I do what I need to do. If I go and race, which I won't do because my knees wouldn't allow that, I may get DQ'd along the way, and so I may have to do something else for that. But just for comfort, it's an easy, smooth, nice stroke for me, and it's nice to carry that forward. It's interesting, we have a lady coaching for us now who was a swimmer at A&M, conference title holder for breaststroke. She still, as of, a month ago, I think we looked, she still had the 50th fastest 200 breaststroke time in the world, which it's not even something I can grasp in my brain, to be honest with that, in the world. And she hated it, and she was so glad to be done with swimming, and it was such a terrible, terrible thing for her relationship with the water. And so she had a roommate who was coaching with us who said, you should come watch this. They're teaching people who are scared of the water how to swim, and they're teaching them to love the water. And she came and she watched, and she said, this is so cool. She said, it reminds me of why I started any of this, and I've completely lost it. And it's really cool to watch her get it back and share that with other people, with all the talent that she had, which for her is just, it's just, I'm glad to have it behind me. So fascinating from, as you talk about the relationship with water.
Absolutely. I mean, I think many former swimmers too tend to go through a certain phase. It depends on how rooted your relationship was, because I know some former very competitive swimmers on the NCAA level that wanted nothing to do with it. And it wasn't one of those, like, I hate it now, I'm gonna love it again. They just were done. For me, I think where it differed was I always loved swimming. I mean, I said every swimmer goes through either I'm gonna go be a triathlete or I'm gonna start weightlifting every single day and become bigger than I've ever been, and so on and so forth. For me, where I think that was a little different, I mean, I went through some of that, but coming back around, I just always felt the need to give back. I mean, you know, in the terms of your coaches and the ones that you've had that have swum at a high level in the past, it's afforded them so many great opportunities, right. You know, and somebody took the time out of their day, you know, for me, 10, 15 years ago, to teach me. And, you know, when I was just as scared as the next guy. And so being able to apply that and then just come full circle. And, you know, I want to pay forward a loving relationship with the water as opposed to the alternative. I just, whether it's access or, you know, financial reasons or just location in the country, swimming isn't as widely learned, and that's something that I would devote my life to expanding, you know, even into my future careers as an adult. I think it's really important that people learn how to swim and become comfortable and enjoy the water. Yeah. I mean, I think that's, like you said, is the most important point.
Thanks for watching today's video. If you liked it, be sure to subscribe, share, ring the bell, comment with any questions. If you're in the DFW area and you'd like more information on swim lessons or swim team, be sure to visit www.sigmaswim.org.